In the sweltering summer heat of 1776, a single document changed the course of human history forever. The Declaration of Independence stands as the foundational cornerstone of the United States of America, a revolutionary manifesto penned primarily by a 33-year-old Virginia lawyer named Thomas Jefferson. On the 4th day of July in that momentous year, delegates from 13 separate colonies gathered in Philadelphia to formally announce their separation from the mighty British Empire. This wasn't merely a political statement, but a bold proclamation of universal human rights that would echo through the centuries, inspiring freedom movements across the entire globe. For decades before independence became reality, American colonists considered themselves loyal subjects of the British Crown. They viewed themselves as Englishmen transplanted across the Atlantic, entitled to the same ancient rights that protected their cousins back in the motherland. These cherished liberties, enshrined in documents like the Magna Carta from 1215 and the Bill of Rights from 1689, included the sacred principle that free men could not be taxed without their consent. The colonists believed their local assemblies, such as Virginia's House of Burgesses, served the same function as Parliament did in England, representing their interests and protecting their freedoms within the vast British Empire. But the British Parliament saw things quite differently. After the expensive 7 Years' War drained the royal treasury, Parliament decided the colonies should help pay for their own defense and administration. In 1765, they imposed the Stamp Act, directly taxing printed materials throughout the colonies without consulting colonial assemblies. When Americans protested that Parliament had no authority to tax them since they held no seats in that distant legislative body, Parliament responded with stunning arrogance. The Declaratory Act of 1766 boldly proclaimed that Parliament possessed absolute authority to pass binding laws for the colonies in all cases whatsoever. This fundamental disagreement over constitutional rights set the stage for a conflict that would tear apart the greatest empire on earth. Tensions escalated rapidly through the late 1760s. The Townshend Acts imposed new taxes on common goods like tea, paper, and glass, sparking outrage in colonial ports. In Boston, the center of resistance, mobs harassed tax collectors and British officials found themselves unable to enforce unpopular laws. Parliament dispatched red-coated regiments to restore order, but their presence only inflamed passions further. On a cold March evening in 1770, frightened British soldiers fired into an angry crowd, killing 5 colonists in what became known as the Boston Massacre. 3 years later, frustrated patriots disguised as Mohawk warriors dumped 342 chests of valuable British tea into Boston Harbor, a defiant act of civil disobedience that would not go unpunished. Britain's response was swift and severe. Parliament passed what colonists called the Intolerable Acts in 1774, a series of punitive measures designed to crush Massachusetts into submission. The colony's elected government was suspended and replaced with direct military rule. British soldiers could now be quartered in private homes without permission. Most alarming of all, colonists accused of crimes might be shipped across the Atlantic for trial, denying them the ancient English right to a jury of their peers. These harsh measures didn't isolate Massachusetts as Parliament hoped. Instead, all 13 colonies rallied to support their sister colony, seeing in her suffering a preview of their own potential fate if royal tyranny went unchecked. The question of Western expansion added fuel to the imperial fire. British authorities, through the Royal Proclamation of 1763, and the Quebec Act of 1774 restricted colonial settlement beyond the Appalachian Mountains. This infuriated land-hungry colonists who believed the rich territories of the Ohio Valley belonged to them by right of conquest after fighting alongside Britain in numerous wars against France. While the separate colonies still didn't think of themselves as a single unified nation, they increasingly found common cause in their shared grievances against Parliament and the Crown, their common English heritage, their cooperation in past military conflicts, and now their united opposition to British policies began forging bonds of unity that would prove crucial in the struggles ahead. When war finally erupted in April 1775, with shots fired at Lexington and Concord, few colonists imagined they were fighting for complete independence. Most believed they were defending their rights as loyal British subjects against an overreaching Parliament. They convinced themselves that King George III secretly sympathized with their cause and would intervene on their behalf if given the chance. Colonial soldiers even reported for duty declaring themselves to be in His Majesty's service. But in August 1775, the king shattered these illusions with his proclamation of rebellion, declaring the colonies in open revolt and ordering his officials to suppress the uprising with military force. From that moment forward, hope for reconciliation within the British Empire began to fade like morning mist. By the spring of 1776, the radical idea of complete independence gained widespread acceptance throughout the colonies. A simple pamphlet played a crucial role in this transformation. Thomas Paine's Common Sense, published in January, spread like wildfire through colonial towns and villages. Written in plain language ordinary people could understand, it made a compelling case that America should break free entirely from monarchical tyranny and establish a republican government based on the consent of the governed. The Second Continental Congress, meeting in Philadelphia to coordinate the war effort, began to realize that independence wasn't just desirable but necessary. European powers like France would never provide military aid to help colonists win better terms within the British Empire, but they might support a new independent nation fighting to be born. In March 1776, North Carolina's Revolutionary Convention became the first to officially vote for independence, with 7 other colonies following suit over the next 2 months. On June 7th, Richard Henry Lee of Virginia rose in Congress to introduce a formal resolution declaring the colonies free and independent states. The motion sparked such fierce debate that Congress postponed the final vote for 3 weeks. During this crucial interval, they appointed a 5-man committee to draft a declaration explaining their reasons for separating from Britain. This committee included some of the most brilliant minds in America: the elder statesman Benjamin Franklin, the passionate John Adams of Massachusetts, the practical Roger Sherman of Connecticut, the diplomatic Robert Livingston of New York, and the eloquent young Thomas Jefferson of Virginia. Thomas Jefferson accepted the primary responsibility for drafting this momentous document. In a rented room on the 2nd floor of a modest Philadelphia house, he spent 17 days in June 1776 carefully crafting each phrase and argument. Jefferson drew heavily upon Enlightenment philosophy, particularly the revolutionary ideas of English philosopher John Locke. He articulated a bold new theory of government built on natural rights and social contract. Kings ruled not by divine right, Jefferson argued, but through the consent of the people they governed. When any government violated the fundamental rights of its citizens, those citizens possessed not just the option but the duty to overthrow such tyranny and establish new protections for their liberties. This wasn't rebellion for trivial causes, but the last resort of a patient people pushed beyond endurance. The Declaration's most famous passage has echoed through history as a clarion call for human dignity and equality. Jefferson wrote that certain truths were self-evident, requiring no elaborate proof because they were fundamental to human nature itself. All men were created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights that no government could legitimately take away. Among these sacred rights were life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Governments existed solely to protect these rights, deriving their just powers from the consent of those they governed. When any government became destructive of these ends, the people retained the right to alter or abolish it. These revolutionary principles challenged centuries of monarchical rule and aristocratic privilege throughout the Western world. After establishing these philosophical foundations, Jefferson devoted the bulk of the Declaration to listing specific grievances against King George III. He accused the monarch of refusing to approve beneficial laws, dissolving elected assemblies, obstructing justice, keeping standing armies in peacetime without colonial consent, and imposing taxes without representation. The king had cut off colonial trade, deprived Americans of trial by jury, and transported them overseas for prosecution. He had hired foreign mercenaries to wage war against his own former subjects with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy unworthy of a civilized nation. In every stage of these oppressions, the colonies had petitioned for redress in the most humble terms, only to receive repeated injury in response. Such a prince, characterized by every act defining tyranny, was unfit to rule free people. Jefferson's draft underwent revision by the other committee members before being presented to Congress on July 1st. For 3 days, delegates debated and modified the text, making strategic cuts and clarifications. On July 4th, 1776, with 12 colonies voting in favor and New York abstaining temporarily, Congress officially adopted the Declaration of Independence. The document was signed initially by John Hancock as President of Congress, his bold signature becoming the most famous. Over the following weeks and months, the remaining 55 delegates affixed their signatures to this revolutionary manifesto, each man knowing he was committing an act of treason against the British Empire punishable by death if their rebellion failed. The Declaration concluded with a solemn and unequivocal statement of separation. The representatives of the United States of America, assembled in General Congress and appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world, formally declared that the colonies were and of right ought to be free and independent states. All allegiance to the British Crown was dissolved. All political connection with Great Britain was severed. As free and independent states, they claimed full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, and establish commerce. To support this declaration, the signers mutually pledged to each other their lives, their fortunes, and their sacred honor. These weren't empty words. Many would indeed suffer imprisonment, financial ruin, or death before the Revolutionary War finally ended in 1783. The Declaration of Independence was initially viewed as a routine legal formality, barely noticed for decades after its adoption. But as the young American republic grew and matured, the document took on profound significance. Its assertion that all men are created equal, though imperfectly realized in 1776, became a moral standard against which the nation would measure its progress. Abolitionists cited it in their crusade against slavery. Suffragettes invoked it demanding votes for women. Civil rights leaders drew upon its principles fighting segregation and discrimination. Around the world, Revolutionaries and reformers have looked to the Declaration as inspiration for their own struggles against oppression. More than 2 centuries after Jefferson's quill touched parchment in that Philadelphia room, the Declaration of Independence remains a living document, a promise not yet fully kept, but forever calling us toward a more perfect realization of human dignity, equality, and freedom. Enjoyed the video? Give it a thumbs up and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more fascinating journeys through history. See you in the next one.